Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Welcome to Is Open Source GIS Right for Your Organization, where we're going to share our four-step process to open source GIS migration. This is going to be sort of a high level what I go through. It's kind of fun doing this, migrating organizations to open source GIS. And by organization, I of course mean if you're a company, if you're a small company, a medium-sized company, large company, or a nonprofit organization. So really, any organization. And what's kind of fun about this is that sometimes what I'm going to be presenting today is just a conversation. And it's a conversation I have with a prospective client that comes up and they say, okay, we're thinking of moving to open source GIS. And the conversation can be really quite short. It can be, so what do you have now? And they say, well, we have a bunch of shape files that are sitting on a file share and everybody can edit them. I say, okay, well, I know what you need. And so the conversation sort of kind of ends there, but then turns into more of a discussion about the database. Or we actually go through everything that I'm describing to you today and we define everything for a client. We do an audit of their current GIS. And then we produce a report where they have a complete strategic plan for this migration to open source GIS. So with that said, kind of keep that in mind that this can scale depending on the size and complexity of your current GIS. All right, so I'm going to start my video and I'm just going to dive right into this and we're going to go through all this material. Okay, so just a little bit about our company if you don't know. We are experts in open source GIS, specifically QGIS, PostGIS, GeoServer. We do remote sensing, training. We offer support. We also do software development. We build custom web-based GIS applications, dashboards, data portals. We also do mobile development, and really anything that's a database-driven application is something that we do. One of the big things that we do is we build cloud-based GIS servers for clients all around the world. We maintain servers in Canada, in the US, in Australia, and Europe. And all of our clients have an open source stack that we deploy for them, and then we help maintain them and offer support and training and backups and everything you would expect from a managed GIS solution. Another thing that we added now is, you might have seen we're doing webinars and things on LunaMap Enterprise. So that's another thing that we've now putting on top of our server as a complete web GIS solution. We have a newsletter. We send it out periodically when we can. We're sending out a little bit more now, and I'm trying to incorporate a little bit more sort of helpful tips and tricks in the newsletter. We're trying to work on that. But we promise not to spam. So if you do sign up for the newsletter, you're not going to be receiving an email every day about, some discount on a GIS course or something. We try to avoid doing that as much as possible, but we do promote our webinars. We promote if a new product or service comes out, we promote that. Or if we're going to be at a conference or an event, we promote that as well. On our website, you can find all of our past webinars. So this is if this is your first time attending one of our webinars, you can go back and you can relive the magic, as we like to say, with all of our previous webinars. They're all available. We have two upcoming also. This Friday, I'll be giving a LunaMap Enterprise demo. So if you go to the webinars page, you can sign up for that and join us for that webinar. And then on June 25th, we're doing Digging into Open Source GIS for Archaeology, where I'm just going to share a few examples of how we set up GIS systems for the archaeology community. Training, if you're interested in training, if any of this is like, oh, I want to know more about PostGIS or things like this, we do offer online training, so you can sort of go in and sign up for a course and learn everything about this. Lastly, our servers. The other big thing that we've changed recently is that we have some really good GIS server, some trial GIS server pricing. So if at the end of this you're kind of like, I really want to try this before I even start thinking about a migration plan, reach out to me. The pricing, I think it's like $1,000 Canadian or something. I can give you the exact pricing if you reach out, but it basically will set up a cloud-based server wherever you are, and you can use it for 3 months and sort of figure out if this is the right software for you. All right, intended audience for this webinar: companies or organizations, of course, considering migrating to open source GIS, GIS administrators who want to start a migration strategy, and anyone really wanting to make a case for open source GIS in an enterprise environment. We get this a lot. I actually get clients sort of reaching out to me. It's like, oh, make a case for us using this specific piece of open source GIS software. So hopefully there'll be some tips and tricks and some information in this webinar that might be helpful to you. So a little disclaimer. First one's a little funny, but this is a very text-heavy presentation. I realize that, and I apologize. So if you are, watching this on YouTube one day and you think there's so much text and you'd like to leave a mean comment, I know there's a lot of text, but this is also very text-heavy process, right? Is that we do go through and we document everything about this, and we ask a ton of questions, and we give surveys and Q&A with clients and things like this. So I unfortunately, it's probably the best way of displaying this in text form. And the information shared is only sort of the starting point in the migration process. Every case is different. There may be some important omissions in this webinar for some specific situations. All right, we're going to go through an introduction, then we're going to go through step 1 to 4 of our process when we're migrating a client. And then I'm going to give a few recommendations and just a few sort of take-home points for you to think about. All right, so when we evaluate our process is really that we sit and evaluate. We do an audit of somebody's GIS and we ask them a ton of questions. And again, as I said at the beginning of this could be as simple as a conversation with the prospective client so that we can scope out the work that we're going to do for them. Or we can really go to the point where we write like a business requirements document or an application requirements document where we define every single piece of the database and all the applications we're going to build into it and how things are going to connect and how things are going to work. The migration plan is exactly that. So after we've evaluated everything, we've asked questions to staff and we've gone through this whole process, we put together this plan, which is really scoping out that whole migration process. And then of course, the next phase is we implement that plan as we start building it out. And then this, I think, is actually one of the most critical steps in this whole process is offering that training and support over time. So if we set up a system for a client, we want to offer them that support and training so that they can continually use it. And keep in mind, most organizations have a lot of turnover, and we go through this a lot with our clients, where everything is set up and fine, everybody knows how to use it today. And then, 5 staff members leave or a couple of new hires come in, and then we have to train them up and make sure they know how to use the system. So we've kind of set up our process in such a way that we move our clients towards that support and training period where they know that if they have any major problems, they can reach out to us and we help them through our ticketing system or whatever it may be, or through a support meeting, or they can just sort of help themselves and go into our training platform. And I'll go into a little more detail about that through this presentation. All right, step 1, evaluate the current GIS. What do we consider? And so we consider a lot as we're going through this: motivation, data governance, hardware, cloud-based services, software, vector data, raster data, workflows, integrations, user management, data issues and considerations. So when we do the GIS audit, so this process, it might include a number of different steps. We might do a Q&A session with the client just during a meeting. We might have more formal questionnaires where we ask the client or the client's staff to actually fill this out. We often do interviews with staff where we'll sit down with individual staff members and say, okay, how do you actually use this? Do you use all these ArcGIS extensions? Or if you do, how do you use this? Are there any pain points? And this whole process is really about evaluating the current system, but also trying to improve it. So during the migration process, we're trying to make things better. We're not just trying to replicate something that's, let's say, in proprietary GIS and replicating it in QGIS. That's definitely goal number 1. Goal number 2 is make it better. So we do interviews with staff. What's wrong? What doesn't work? What do we need to improve? We do hands-on evaluation of the current GIS. Sometimes we connect directly to their database. Sometimes we do a screen share and they show us some of their layouts or what they do, or just some common workflows that they have. And then the end result of this is some sort of final report. Now, it could be a final report, or it could just be scoping out for a contract. If it's a very simple migration, we sort of know, from previous experience what we have to do. So we line things up and we create a scoping document. But we might want to actually just produce a report. So we have a number of clients coming to us saying, okay, we need to make the case for open source GIS. We need to do a cost benefit analysis. And we need to do a full audit of our GIS to find out what it will actually cost to move our current system into open source. So that's where the final report will come in. Motivation. So what is the organization's main reason to migrate to open source GIS? This is actually one of the questions we ask. So license restrictions with proprietary software is often a problem. Licensing costs for proprietary software is no longer affordable. This happens a lot. I talked to a number of organizations who are like, well, everything was fine, but then we hired 10 new people, and now all of a sudden the licensing cost is so high that we can't afford it anymore. It's not going to scale nicely over time. And when we hire that next 20 people that we plan to hire, or that bunch of seasonal staff who are going to have to come in and work just during the summer, all of a sudden things are going to get really expensive really fast. Some people also just want to move to open source because they want the freedom to develop some sort of custom solution. So we help with that. Some people want certain functional requirements. This happens a lot when people are using sort of a shapefile system. So, they have a bunch of shapefiles or geo packages sitting on a file share. Everybody connects to them. Everybody edits them. It's all fine until two people want to edit the same layer at the same time. And this is where we need a database. We need to be able to connect to a relational database management system to be able to do things like multi-user editing. We have a webinar on multi-user editing if you're interested. And then there's also other reasons, right? There's innumerable reasons why people might want to move to open source GIS, but we need to understand this because it's nice to know the motivation behind making this decision. What migration strategy is the organization planning to implement? And this is the other part about it, is that I always ask, what's your motivation? And then the other thing is like, how do you want to actually do this? Sometimes we're just doing rehosting. We've had clients come to us who actually have Postgres and they have GeoServer, but they realize they're not actually managing the server. They sort of spun it up and they're using a previous version and they need help with upgrades. So we basically lift and shift. We grab their current solution, we throw it onto our cloud-based systems, and we're good to go. This is more common, is that replatforming. So we might lift, grab all their stuff, grab all their data from some sort of proprietary system or even another open source system. We're going to tinker with it. We're going to change some things. We're going to build a new database. We're going to consolidate data, and then we're going to shift it onto our cloud-based platform. Hybrid migration is another common situation. There's oftentimes, there's always this argument that, oh, we're in too deep with our proprietary solution. There are actually situations like that where I've seen clients come to me and say, we have some sort of third-party flood monitoring system, and it only uses this ArcGIS extension, so we need to have ArcGIS in-house for that. But we can develop tons of other systems using open source GIS, tons of other like web GIS and dashboards and this and that. We want to be able to connect to something and pull it in and do all kinds of awesome ETL processes. For that, hybrid solution is great. We have both. We haven't done this, but there is the sort of big bang migration where, all right, we're going to shut everything down on Friday, and on Monday you're using open source GIS. This is a situation where you might be actually updating layers frequently, daily, every minute, every hour, right? And so we need to know that we're going to shut down and we're going to restore. We've never, thankfully, been sort of in that situation. We'd be able to handle it because we'd be able to sort of rebuild the whole database and then at the last moment transfer the data from old to new. But it would definitely be a busy few days. There are also other strategies. There's sometimes, certain aspects of their current system might be a simple lift and shift, but then we might actually have to build in new things, and we might have to do hybrid migrations for certain aspects as well. So it's a mixed bag, but pretty much most people will fit into either the first or second or third option here. All right, GIS and data governance. So we often ask, what documents do you have associated with your GIS department? And this is where every GIS manager in this webinar is going to go, oh, shoot, I really should get that done one day, or they have it half written. I've been in that situation, so I know exactly what it feels like. But having some sort of strategic plan, some sort of guiding document, whatever you call it, for your GIS department, have some sort of idea of where you are now and where you want to go. It's also nice to have documentation. So I collect these documents if I can. If you have them, give them to me. I want to look at them. I want to have it to give me a better understanding of what your enterprise system is like. So let's look at your documentation. If you have any workflows that you've documented, I want those. If you have hardware, software configurations, let me know about those. If you actually have a data governance plan and policies in place, either through your IT department or through some other department within your organization, let's see those. Maybe they're not specifically GIS, but they apply to GIS either directly or indirectly. We should take a look. There's also often IT security policies and procedures that we have to adhere to. So this is something early on that I want to get this information from. I want to know what I'm working with, especially in terms of the IT infrastructure within the organization. Metadata, dirty word, I know. Some people, I think everybody recognizes we should have metadata for data, especially the data that we create within an organization, but oftentimes we don't. But if there are metadata, I do want to see them. And there's also other strategic documents that might come into play, planning documents for the organization. So anything like that is usually helpful to give a good idea of the state of the GIS. Hardware. We talk about hardware a lot with clients. I want to know what's inside their organization. Again, I giggle because this is sometimes a very short conversation. I'm like, do you have a server? I'm like, yeah, we have a server. When did you last upgrade that server? About 8 or 9 years ago. Does anybody manage it? No, well, every now and then Jeff goes in there just to make sure it's still running. Those are the sort of scary situations. And I know that some people might be nodding their head. I'm like, yeah, that's me. So we ask about servers. Some people have a lot of their GIS data, if they're doing like especially a file-based system, it's sitting on a NAS. If they have a whole whack of aerial photos, it's sitting on some QNAP in the back server room. I want to know about networking, internal and external. Are there any restrictions? Is there a firewall in place? Is there anything that could prevent us from being able to connect nicely to a cloud-based server from within your organization? This is a big one: internet speed and reliability. We have clients who have great speed, but it's not reliable, and there's a lot of packet loss, and it ends up being a very slow database connection. So sometimes we have to think of something like a hybrid solution where it'll be half on premises, half in the cloud, or some other compromise that we can make to adapt to that sort of low or unreliable internet speed. IT management, who does it? You can't believe the number of times that I've asked people this, and they're going like, well, we don't really have anyone. We sort of turned it on in 2019, and it's been working ever since. So this is something I like to know, but also a lot of organizations have an external IT company. So at that point, we have to play nicely with them, right? And we have to build that rapport also with that external IT organization in order to deploy the solution that we want to. Cloud-based services. More and more organizations are moving services to the cloud. We need to know which ones are out there. So this is in terms of databases. If you're running a SQL server on Azure, I want to know about that. Do you have a GIS server somewhere in the cloud? What's it running? Is it a Windows system? Is it a Linux system? Do you do any file sharing with some sort of cloud-based solution? This is important. This is where I always have a conversation with clients about this. Is everybody within the same region? Is everybody in the UK? That'll be fine. But if you have staff, I have a number of clients who have staff all around the world, and we've had to think of innovative solutions to adapt to that, where they have clients, where they have staff in Australia, North Africa, the Middle East, and some in Europe. And then we have to figure out a solution that will sort of make everybody happy. So we do want to know if these sort of intra-regional and interregional distribution of all services. What do you use? Are you on AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, DigitalOcean? We sort of want to know what you're comfortable using. We often use DigitalOcean, but we have used every single one of these solutions at some point in time just to solve a problem. Is there any advanced cloud-based infrastructure? Do you have some sort of massive load balancing system in place that we should know about for anything? Software. This is an obvious one. So we really asked three main questions. We asked like, what software do you have? How do you use it? And then who in the organization uses it? That was not spelt right, that last question. All right, so desktop GIS software. We asked them about that. What do you have? ArcGIS, QGIS? Are you guys using some other solution? So we want to know what you have. Do you have a GIS server? Are you using GeoServer? Are you using Esri server? Something like this. Are you using anything for a GIS server right now? What about spatial databases? Are you using Postgres right now with PostGIS, or are you using SQL Server? Are you using Oracle? Nice to know what you currently have. And then we also ask about mobile data collection. And this is the one where you get the most variability, right? Is that you're going to ask people what they use. And if they're sort of Esri clients, you know, you're going to get like the survey 123s or field maps or something like this. But then, if we go beyond that, you're going to have people mentioning like Fulcrum Map, Mergent Maps, QField, and a whole bunch of other solutions that I've had people mention in the past. I always ask what ArcGIS extensions people are using. If it's an Esri house, I kind of want to know like what additional extensions are you buying, because any of the functionality within those extensions, we are going to have to migrate. We're going to have to adapt those to the new solution. So it's usually a case of sort of going in and say, okay, I know what the spatial analyst toolbar extension does. We're able to easily do that within PostGIS and a combination of PostGIS and native QGIS tools and so on. WebGIS, and again, this is kind of like mobile GIS, because once you get down to asking people about this, you might have the easy answers. Like, well, we use ArcGIS online, but you might have other people using like Felt or Mungo Map or whatever it is, or GIS Cloud or some of the other options out there. Or Luna Map Enterprise, just joking. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different solutions that somebody might be using for WebGIS. So, but it's important not only to understand what they're doing, but if they have something custom as well. If they're like, we built something entirely custom with Esri, and when you click on a button, it does something and creates this thing. We need to ask, like, are we going to be replicating that custom web map application? If so, that's going to lead to some additional expense during the migration process. Office software. Why do I ask about Office software? Because it always comes up. And if you're using like Office 365 and SharePoint and all of this stuff, it sort of works its way into the GIS because we're always using the file system in some way, right? You're not going to do like, raster analysis on some WCS service. Like you could do it a little bit, and we do it on small scale analysis, but you're not going to do a big hydrological analysis on using a web service like this. So it's nice to know sort of where are the files going to be stored. Are they in-house? Are they in the cloud? How does this work? Lastly, I like to know operating systems. Most people in the office are going to be using Windows. That's fine. Some people might be using Linux. You might get some surprises, and people are like, we all use Mac, and we want to use Mac. This is why QGIS is important to us. But I want to know mobile devices. Are you using iOS? Are you using Android? What are we going to have to deal with here as we move towards doing mobile? Vector data. We want to know the quantity of data in terms of total storage as well as number of layers. We want to know the file formats, the storage locations. Are they on-prem, off-prem? Themes or types of data. What do you actually have? Do you have a lot of third-party government data and that's it? Or do you actually create data and store some of your own? What is the update frequency for data sets? What's the creation frequency for data, vector data, and how does that scale over time? Are you adding a lot of data every single month or 2 months? How does this work? Do you have any access rules or restrictions to the data? What's your backup strategy? Do you have a disaster recovery or a business continuity plan? We need to sort of know all of this. Raster data is very similar. We ask about the quantity of data. And again, we want to know, like, how many sets of aerial photos do you have? Also, how big are they? We want to know the file formats, especially with raster data, as it turns into something like some weird proprietary raster format. We need to know about that ahead of time and need to know if we're able to translate that data into something like a GeoTIFF. And we also want to know about your optimization strategy. If you are sharing this on the web, are you turning these into cogs? What's going on here? What's the storage location? Do you keep it all in-house, or is it stored in the cloud? Do you have it sitting on an S3 bucket somewhere? Types of raster data are required. Are we dealing with aerial photos, multispectral, satellite imagery, DEMs? This is all very important to us in terms of how we're going to optimize it and put it on on GeoServer. What's the update frequency, especially for third-party data sets, things like aerial photos? If you're getting aerial photos every year, every 5 years, it'd be nice to know, because this gives us an idea of how your GIS is going to grow over time in terms of storage. What's the creation frequency and quantity over time? Think of things like if you do collect drone imagery and you're always wanting to share that drone imagery through GeoServer, like not just keep it in-house, but actually share it on the web somewhere. How much are you growing? How much is this going to cost over time? So when we're working out the budget, we're just working out the budget for migrating this, but we're going to say, well, within 5 years, if you keep on collecting this much imagery, this is how much it's going to cost to store stuff in the cloud. Any access rules or restrictions, again, backup strategy and the disaster recovery and business continuity plan for raster data. Workflows. This is easy. What type of analysis do you guys do? Do you just, well, we open up the GIS, we make a couple of maps, and we print them, or we output them to a PNG, and then we put it into our report, and we're happy and we're done? Or are we doing something a little more complex? This is where the workflow migration comes into play, where I actually have to go through, I have to define what you're doing currently with your current solution, and then say, okay, how are we going to do this in QGIS, PostGIS, to achieve the same result? What are your typical GIS outputs? Are you just making maps? Are you creating layers that are eventually going to go onto your web GIS? Are you creating just data products that get shared with somebody else through the organization? How does this work? What are you actually doing? Data creation process is also important. This always leads to a fun discussion, like how do you actually create data? Are you just digitizing stuff on screen, like drawing something over an aerial photo? Are you doing field surveys? Are you collecting data with a drone? Are you doing any type of, or are you just, creating data through analytical output on the desktop? What about data acquisition and geoprocessing scripts? Do you have any ETL scripts? Are you using anything to actually pull data from some external source and then bringing it into your organization? Have you developed any scripts? What language are you using to develop these scripts? Is it all Python based? Is it all Python based but deeply connected to the Esri world? Are we going to have to translate these to other libraries? So this is kind of something we have to know, because this adds time, of course, to the migration process. Related to that is integrations. GIS integration into other systems. So how does your GIS integrate into other systems? A very good example would be something like the finance department. Let's say you have something, you manage the parcel data set, but your data set gets pulled into, there's a direct database connection to your SQL server, and that gets pulled into the finance department, and they do something fancy with it. If there's a connection like that, we need to know about it, because if we migrate, we're going to break that unless we plan that correctly. Are other systems integrating GIS systems? So are people actually pulling data from your system into another system? So it might be through the web, might be through a web service where they're actually accessing your data and bringing in. If we bring down your current system, are we going to be making a lot of people unhappy? And this relates to this is those external connections through either web connections or API connections to the data sets. Dependence on external services. I think this is another important aspect. If you are pulling data from an external service, is it a highly proprietary external service where things might break if we try to adapt it into the open source world? Most of the time, these things work. There's very rare occasions where I'm trying to pull data from some other service and I can't pull it into our system, but it can happen. But this is something where we have to actually go through and take a look at. User management is very important. We have to the quantity of staff and internal GIS users is pretty much one of the first questions I ask when I'm talking to a new organization. How big are you? How many people use GIS? And my little goal that I always put in my head whenever I ask people this is if they say, well, we have 57 staff members. I'm like, how many GIS users do you have? We have 3. My goal is always to bring that number up and to say, well, more people could actually use this. We could have read-only users connecting to your database, and all of a sudden your 3 GIS users now turn into 23. And we can do that. There's no license restrictions, so easy to do. External GIS users, I'm always curious, is there anybody actually connecting directly to your database or other services that you have that are using it on a daily basis? Again, these are people that might be sad if we all of a sudden change things. Group roles. What group roles do you have right now for your GIS users? Are there just simply administrators, editors, and viewers, or do you have a more granular permission system in place? Are there any authentication methods that we have to keep in mind? Do you use single sign-on? Are you using Active Directory? Is there something that we need to know and incorporate into the new deployment to make sure everything aligns perhaps with your IT policies within the organization? I always want to know about GIS user locations. This is really one of the first questions I ask people, like, where's everybody? If they say, that they're all in house, we have one office in Sydney and everybody's here, but we have one staff member in Melbourne, that's not a problem. If we're doing a cloud-based solution with a server in Sydney, but every now and then we have, everybody's in London, England, but we have a couple of staff members who are in South Africa. And I'm like, that's going to be a problem for them. So we need to figure out a solution that will make everybody happy. The work from homes, we also have to think about that because that changes how we're going to do security. If we have people connecting from random IP addresses, the local Starbucks, we sort of need to know that we're going to open up IP addresses in that way. So again, that intra-regional or interregional connectivity is really important for us to know. Data issues and considerations. This is a short list of what I actually think about when I'm talking to people. Sensitive or classified data. We have this quite a bit. You might have landowner information and that can't get out. You might have some other classified information that you're allowed to use within your organization. Can we share it on the web? Can we make it available? Should we be securing it in some other way? Data residency is very important. We've worked with First Nations communities too, where data has to reside within the First Nation and can't come off of it. Countries, municipalities, a number of Canadian organizations that we work with, all data has to reside within Canada. It can't be moved anywhere else. So this is something that we do have to discuss. Third-party data licensing agreements have to be considered. Perhaps there's a clause in those agreements where we can't move the data into a cloud-based solution. They have to be used in-house or something like this. We have to have some clarity on that. Metadata. We also like to know if there are any metadata associated with the data sets. Data-related risks. Is there something, are there any huge risks to do with the data? It's like your 911 system relying on your GIS, and if that connection breaks, we're going to have major public health-related issues. That's something to consider. Also, regulatory compliance requirements. We do have to consider if there's any in place that might have to be part of our migration strategy. Data security rules or regulations. I've already mentioned the sort of IT department and their oversight possibly over the GIS department. If there's any rules in place, this is where it has to come in when we're planning this part. All right, so the migration plan. So the migration plan really includes 6 main sections. The database design, the software plan, the data migration plan, the QGIS configuration plan, the workflow plan, and the user management plan. So the database design is fairly simple. I ask the question, what type of database is needed? And then we go on and we define these. But we have the vector data warehouse, which is just grab everything and put it into one database, a centralized project database where we have these centralized layers and then maybe individual schemas per project. And then we have a project per schema database where we sort of replicate the same project structure within the database. And there's other things. There's sort of a mix and match of these things. If you're interested in database designs, we did a fairly recent webinar on the subject where I presented these 3 types of databases and just talked about how we structure these for different types of clients. So what about the software plan? When we're putting together a server, it's usually Postgres. PostGIS is the central brain in the operation. As you know, we installed GeoServer, which is our GIS server. Everything connects via QGIS. We might interact with the file system. We might have to define how that relationship works, and staff connect using QGIS for the most part. If they're doing any field data collection, they might be using Mergin maps to do that collection. And then we might have to install another piece of software, MerginDB Sync, in order to sync the field data back into the database. And that way, when staff could collect data, it's automatically going into the database and everybody's happy. Our recently launched LunaMap platform is the web map application, where it pulls data from Postgres, pulls data from GeoServer, and then presents this out. And this is a great way of sharing GIS data with staff who may or may not want to use QGIS, but also a good way of sharing this with clients. All right, so the data migration plan, we have to figure out where we're going to move the vector data. So we usually go through a process of collecting all of the vector data, figuring out what schema it's going to go into within the database and how it's going to be structured, and the naming strategy for the data. So there's a whole process of just kind of figuring out how are we going to structure this data, where are we going to put it? How are we gonna transform it along the way? Are we gonna move everything to using the same CRS? Are we accepting of the fact that we might have a mixed bag of CRSs within the database? If so, then we just sort of move it over and whatever it is. We also have to talk about raster data optimization and migration to GeoServer. So this is usually quite a little bit of a longer process, where we have to transfer these like 30 gig files back and forth and then upload them to the server. We also have to look at other data. So we have to look at things like print layouts. I always ask our new clients, I'm like, just send me PDFs. I don't care. Like whatever print layouts you have, if there's any styles that you have, even if they're for Esri or whatever, just send those over and we'll work with them and translate into the QGIS world. And especially non-spatial tables. So even though our database is, primarily spatial, there's always going to be these non-spatial tables. Think of them as like foreign key lookups. If you want a drop-down menu that shows every client name, well, it'd be nice to have a list of all of your clients so we can put that into a table. QGIS configuration includes setting up GeoServer and PostGIS connections in QGIS. We define default symbology for all vector data, which you can store Postgres. We create attributes forms if needed. We build QGIS-based database applications. We build custom QGIS plugins. So if you have like a project database that you've created, we can create a button where you press a new button, it creates a new project. If you want to add a new row to a non-spatial table, you can click a button and a form shows up. So we build a lot of these types of applications for enterprise clients. Workflow plan. Desktop workflows. So whatever you do on the desktop, we have to translate it from your current solution to the open source world. Any ETL workflows, geoprocessing scripts, things like this, we have to translate them into something that will work with the current solution, the new solution. And mobile data collection workflow. So if you're using something, proprietary right now, and you're going to be moving to something like Mergent Maps, we have to sort of create the same type of forms and the same type of logic that you have with your current solution as you will within this solution. Database level automation, normalization. This is where we actually have to sort of define a little bit more how the structure of the database and any automation is going to happen. So if we're going to build things like trigger functions within the database or views, we will define those. User management plan, we have to define our user group. So maybe based on what we've learned from the evaluation, we might change it. We might say, you know what, maybe you do need a special group just for your planning department or for your engineering department. Let's create a special group for them because we can assign specific permissions to them within the database. We have to define privileges for each group and say, okay, so the planners, they can edit all the stuff in the planning schema, and the engineers can edit everything within the engineering schemas. Everybody can see everything in every schema. But we have to go through that process of really tearing it apart and getting very granular with the data and figuring out who should have access to what. I like to get a list of users and associated group roles, and then we can generate those automatically within the database. We also write a number of user management scripts. So this is just making it easy for the client to say, all right, people have added a whole bunch of stuff to the database, run these scripts, and everybody will have the proper permissions that they need. Implement the plan. So this is pretty much sort of 6 steps that we go through to build this thing. As we design the database and we implement it, we configure GeoServer. These are usually the 2 things that we do first. And with GeoServer, we do this sort of raster data optimization to COGS and then serve them out through GeoServer. We publish and style vector data through GeoServer. Then we set up the user management for both GeoServer and Postgres as defined in the plan. We build all the sort of desktop GIS configuration forms. So layer styles, sorry, all that GIS configuration. So attributes, forms, QGIS projects, custom QGIS plugins, all of this stuff. Then we go on, once we have the database. So imagine this. So we have like the database set up, we have GeoServer set up, serving out all of our data. We have the desktop working fine. We have the user management system. So at this point, we can then set up the mobile data collection and we can set up the web GIS. All right, so the last step, step 4, we're almost there, is that support and training step. So what we do is we give all of our clients and all of their staff within limits access to LunaGeo Learn. So that gives them access to all of our main courses, which includes Intro to QGIS, Advanced QGIS 1, Introduction to GeoServer, Introduction to PostGIS and QGIS in an enterprise environment, which is one of my favorite courses, where it's all on databases and SQL and so on. We can also develop custom onboarding LunaGeo Learn courses. So if you have something where you're like, okay, all this stuff is great, we're going to get everybody to use these for onboarding, but we have certain workflows that we want to teach new or existing staff. Can we develop a custom course and have that be only available to our organization? The answer is yes. So we do this for a number of organizations where they just want this custom course online that they can use for onboarding or upskilling their current staff. And we offer support through our ticketing system. So I think this is the important part, is that oftentimes I hear this argument, which isn't very valid, that, oh, open source GIS doesn't come with any support. That's the problem. There's no support. It's absolutely false. There's tons of companies, not just LunaGeo, that offer professional support for open source GIS software. We've kind of tried to streamline that process where we spin up a server for you, we manage your server in the cloud, we can fix anything. I have this countless times during the day where somebody on my staff will just sort of, we get a ticket, they say, oh, this permission isn't working in the database, or this isn't working. We can easily log in, we resolve the problem, we email them, and ticket goes away. So I think that process is hugely important. So it's one thing just to move people to open source GIS, but they sort of need that ongoing support through either training, which is, I see it as kind of like the self-serve part of it. And there's also the support where I see like, I just don't know what to do. I just fix something. All right, so here are just a couple of recommendations if this is kind of the road that you're thinking of going down. Do a cost-benefit analysis. Conduct a well-researched cost-benefit analysis when considering migrating to open source GIS. But definitely make sure you're looking ahead 5, 10, 15 years, because there will be an initial cost. Although open source GIS comes with no licensing fees, there is a cost to actually moving all this over. So start with the GIS audit. Audit your current system to evaluate not only what you have, but how it is used by staff. You would not believe the number of times I'll talk to the GIS department and ask them sort of, like, what licenses do you have? What are you guys actually using? And I get this long list of like extensions and things like this. And then I talk to staff and I'm like, what are you doing with the GIS? I'm like, oh, we print a map every now and then. So they're not really using all that software they have. So definitely do an audit to evaluate what you actually need. So if you're going to migrate something over, like what are you actually using? And what you're using is what you're going to need in the new system. So there are many benefits. Always look beyond cost and consider the many benefits of migrating to open source GIS. We put an article a little while back that I wrote on the benefits of open source GIS. It's on LinkedIn. If you sort of dig through the LunaGeo page, you'll see it there. And we outline the many benefits of open source GIS. And there are many. There's just, I think one of the greatest aspects of it is just that ability to customize, to be able to, especially in an enterprise environment, just to be able to create that custom solution where, you know what, I just want to be able to create a button that does this thing in the database, pulls some data from GeoServer, loads up a new project in QGIS and calls it the new project name. We can easily develop those types of solutions. Ask for help. We do this, but again, we do this. There's a bunch of other companies that we're friendly with around the world who work with open source GIS, but we can help evaluate your current GIS. Unbiased, right? Is that I try to be as unbiased as possible, because there are those situations that I encounter, and I've worked in organizations that are like this, where you have something that requires a certain proprietary solution. It's not, you don't just walk in and say, let's get rid of everything and just use QGIS. There are those situations. So this is where we can provide a lot of insight to that. It's like we can come in and say, okay, we know what we can do with this open source GIS, so we can critically evaluate your current setup and write a full open source migration plan. It would be very helpful just to have that plan, and the end result of that is a dollar sign, right? Is to say, it's going to cost you $15,000 to migrate your current solution. It's going to cost you $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 to migrate your current solution to open source GIS. But if you compare that to your current licensing costs, there might be a benefit there, right? There might be able to say, you know what, this is going to be an immediate investment, but within 3 or 4 years, this is so much cheaper than what we're currently paying. Future-proof your GIS. I go through this a lot with clients where they're like, all right, well, we're going to have a project per schema and it's going to grow. And I always have to take a step back and say, okay, well, what's this going to look like in 5 or 10 years when you've done, 2,500 little projects? That's going to be a lot of schemas within a database. So we really have to think through the whole process and look down the road and say, okay, well, you're collecting this much drone imagery every year. This is going to cost you a lot in server fee. So we might want to maintain some sort of in-house file storage for this stuff and only share out the end result, that ortho photo that you produce that's fully optimized. So think through these things. These are sort of our starting point recommendations, something for you to consider if you move in this direction. Okay, so we've kind of gone over time. Sorry for that. I was hoping to keep it tight on 45 minutes, so I don't really have time for a lot of questions right now, but here's what I want you to do. Book a meeting with me. If this is something you're interested in, this isn't like a high sales situation. But if this is like, you know what, we've been considering looking at this, migrating to open source GIS. This is something that we've been talking about a lot, but we really don't know where to start. We just need sort of a plan to put this together. Let's meet, let's talk. And if we can help you, we would love to. If you just have questions, set up a meeting or send me an email. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. If there's something you think that we missed during this webinar where you didn't consider this, how do you consider that? Do you talk about this? Please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from people who've attended our webinars. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming and spending the time with me today. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.